Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to this solemn occasion to honor Colonel Joseph R. Cafarella, Colonel retired, a World War II hero, and he also served during Korea and Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Cafarella family, and friends of the late Joseph R. Cafarella, elected officials, neighbors, welcome to this ceremony on this special Memorial Day, to honor and remember a great man who served his country with pride and distinction. Born in Malden, Massachusetts on October 15, 1920, to Gaetano Cafarella and Rosa Cincotta, the family lived at 54 Chester Street in Malden. I lived at 26 Chester when I was born, so I know that neighborhood very well. Joe Cafarella graduated Malden High School in 1938. He was the husband of Mary F. Chambers, father of Rosanna Greco and her husband Giuseppe, Joseph Cafarella Jr., his wife Barbara, Paul T. Cafarella, and grandfather Salvatore and Paul Greco, and Michael and Daniel Cafarella. He was also the brother of Rose Worth, Mary Cafarella, Felix Cafarella, Rudolph Cafarella, and Elena Miranda. Joe Cafarella lived most of his life in Malden when he wasn't serving his nation in various locations in the United States and abroad. Mr. Dempsey told me at Colonel Cafarella's funeral last year that he was Joe's good friend. To me, there's no better stamp of approval. Mr. Dempsey, also an American hero who served in World War II, was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor. Bill has the distinction of being one of the very first men with the Rainbow Division into the Dachau concentration camp to assist and rescue and liberate 30,000 people awaiting execution. At this time, I'd like everybody to look at the flag and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Render the appropriate salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, justice for all. Thank you. That's in honor of Joe and all the veterans who are no longer with us today. Colonel Cafarella comes from a military family. The Cafarella and Cincotta family have deep roots in this area and have continued to serve this country. Joe Cafarella had an impressive career in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a colonel. He served in the U.S. Army Air Force from October 24, 1942, until his discharge as a major in the U.S. Army Air Force, or the U.S. Air Force, in 1946. He was a group navigator with the 320th Bomb Group in Europe. He flew in B-26 type aircraft in many combat missions and was responsible for training of all the navigators in his group. He was an expert in celestial, pilotage, radio navigation, and in the use of maintenance of all navigation instruments. Colonel Cafarella also had the knowledge of meteorology, map reading, photo interpretation, and radio communications. He navigated 2 crossings of the North Atlantic. It wasn't easy in those days. Colonel Cafarella also served in the military, as I mentioned before, during the Korean and Vietnam Wars. For his service in World War II, Colonel Cafarella was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 6 clusters, European Theater Ribbon, European African Theater Ribbon with 8 battle stars, the Presidential Citation with cluster, the French Croix de Guerre avec palme, or with a palm, among many other awards and medals. Not only did Colonel Cafarella serve as a group navigation officer in the European theater with the 320th Bomb Group, he also served his country proudly until I went in the service, 1978, I believe. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Sadly, Joe's brother, Felix Cafarella, United States Army, died on March 23, 1945, in Germany, just weeks before the war ended. He was wounded on March 19th and died 5 days later on March 23rd. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mayor Gary Christensen to say a few words on behalf of the city.
Thank you. Last year, when Veterans Services Director Kevin Jarvis shared with me the obituary of the late Colonel Joseph Cafarella, we both knew instantaneously that we had to do something more than issue a press release, attend his service, or lower our flags to half staff. This man deserves so much more, and we felt the Memorial Square was a perfect tribute, as it would serve as a permanent reminder for future generations of why they are so fortunate to live in this great country. This is the home of the free because of brave heroes like Joe, whose impressive military career in the Air Force spanned nearly 40 years, serving his country in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. For his service in World War II, he was awarded several distinguished honors and retired as a colonel. Joe truly embodied the core values of the United States Air Force: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all that is done. And if serving his country with valor wasn't enough, he was also a lifelong Malden resident who loved his community and even served as a city councilor at one point. In fact, if I know he was here today, he would demand that these sidewalks be repaired. Fortunately, City Councilor Peg Crow is already on it, and they will be addressed this summer. Joe is a true Maldonian who did great things when his country called during some of its darkest days. Today, as people throughout the country gather to pay tribute to those who fought for our freedoms, we stand together to thank Joe and his family for what they have done for us. This memorial not only shows our endless gratitude, but for years to come, this square will stand to honor the freedom that Colonel Cafarella so steadfastly upheld. Thank you. And I would like to let the Cafarella family know that I'm not alone in how I feel. Today we're joined by several city councilors. To my right, we have Ryan O'Malley representing Ward 4. One of our councilor at large, we have Craig Spatafora. Representing Ward 2, we have Paul Condon. Our city council president and representing this ward, Peg Crow. We also have representing Ward 7 and a veteran himself, Neil Anderson. And from the school committee, we have Mike Drummy representing Ward 1. And I would also like to acknowledge our police chief, Kevin Molis. Chief, thank you for being here. And let me just end by saying, when we typically do these memorial squares, they don't usually have a spotlight on them, but Colonel Cafarella does today. And so we just want to say thank you one more time to the family, Mrs. Cafarella, for all that you have done for our city, our state, country, and the world for that matter.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Salvatore Greco, Colonel Cafarella's grandson, who will speak about his grandfather and introduce the family who is with us today. And also, I want to recognize John Webster, my predecessor, who's standing here, Vietnam veteran, did my job for like 10 years. Thanks, John.
All right, John.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming on this cold, rainy Memorial Day. It's an honor that this memorial is being dedicated to my grandfather. The family is very appreciative of this. And I would like to, on behalf of the family, thank Mayor Christensen, Kevin Jarvis, and our Ward 1 Councilor Peg Crow for this tremendous honor and something that will last forever here in the house where he spent his last 38 years. I would like to welcome and thank our family from out of state, his son, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Cafarella, his other son, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Cafarella Jr., his sons, Michael and Daniel. I have to acknowledge my lovely and beautiful grandmother, the love of his life, Mary Cafarella. And my mother, his daughter Rosanna Greco, and my brother, his other grandson Paul Greco, and unfortunately he's not here to meet him today, his new great-grandson Luca Greco, who Kate is holding over there. You know, he loved Malden. He never left, except when service called. He was a part of this community. He was a very dedicated member of the Malden Kiwanis. He had many friends there and loved his Thursday luncheons at Anthony's. He was a counselor here. His family used to have a store where Malden Station currently resides. He was involved in the politics of Malden. He knew everything that was going on here. I wish he was here today to see the tearing down of Malden City Hall, because that's something, for as long as I can remember, that he always talked about and wanted to happen. He is smiling today because of that. And also, I also want to remember World War I veterans today, given the centennial anniversary of World War I. But he loved his town, and if he was here today, he wouldn't want this. He was modest. He didn't brag about his military service. He didn't talk about it much. And much of what he did, we didn't even learn about until after he passed, and we dug through and found everything ourselves. He cared about his family and cared about his city, and the war happened, and it wasn't something that he spent much time talking about. So it was kind of a surprise to us when we saw the awards and accolades and medals and everything that was given to him and read the stories of his service. And it was deeply impressive and made everybody very proud that someone like that was in our family, and it was our grandfather. But thank you again, and I would just like to introduce my uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Cafarella, to say a few more words about his service in the United States Air Force.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm glad you're here to help us share in this great day. I appreciate those in uniform who are here as well, both in first responders and the military. So on behalf of the entire Cafarella family, I'd like to thank the mayor, the Veterans Affairs Office, and all those working behind the scenes to make this day possible in honoring my father with this memorial. Sadly, most of the men and women from that greatest of generations are no longer with us. But as with any veteran, all they really want is for their community to appreciate their military service and to be remembered. And what a better way to be remembered than with this memorial here in front of the house. My father was very proud of his hometown, Malden, which is why he retired and lived here for almost 40 years after military service. And again, I have to echo what Tori said, is I only, because he mentioned it so many times, is I wish he lived long enough to see that City Hall being torn down, reopening Pleasant Street, and bringing vitality back to Malden Square, which is something we can't echo enough. You know, during World War II, he was one of hundreds of Malden citizens who joined the military soon after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 1941. And he was smart. He was good with numbers, he was good with math, and wanted to fly, so he was assigned to the Army Air Corps and started navigator training. And he went on to serve as navigator in B-26 bombers in combat operations in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, almost to the end of the war when he took an R&R and came home, and the war ended while he was on an R&R leave. But during his 2 years of combat time, he crash-landed twice, once in North Africa and once in France. And his decorations have already been mentioned, but his unit was also awarded the 2 Presidential Unit Citations, which is fairly significant. During the Korean War era, he was recalled to active duty after being a councilman here in Malden for a while, and even served a year in South Korea during that period. And during the Vietnam era, he served as a navigator in C-124 airlift aircraft and flew all over the world. And what he was most proud of is during his normal routine Air Force career was that he was base commander at 3 different bases, something that just didn't happen those days for a navigator. They weren't assigned to command positions. But he was one of the chosen few, and he returned to Malden after his retirement in 1978. But let me summarize by just saying that my family is eternally grateful to the city of Malden for honoring my father with this memorial, and I sincerely hope it will be an inspiration to future generations. So thank you.
Well, if I could, we are now going to make a surprise presentation because we knew how the Colonel felt about City Hall, so I'd like to call the City Councils up. If you could join me. What we have to present to the family today is a commemorative brick from the first demolition of City Hall that occurred a couple weeks ago. And City Council and I would now like to present this to you, and if we could, we'd like to bring it over to Mrs. Cafarella. Please. Please. There it is, what he always wanted.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the Cafarella family continued to serve with 2 sons in the Air Force, retired lieutenant colonels. So I want to thank you all for coming out today. We have a parade to start in a few minutes down Malden Square, a memorial service in Forest Hill Cemetery about 10:30, give or take. Then at 1 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to have a World War I monument rededication ceremony at the corner of the Fellsway and Malden Street. If you haven't been there in a while, you're barely going to recognize it. Thank you very much, and forever let this be known as Colonel Joseph R. Cafarella Memorial Square.
All right.